Can you comment on the so-called Operation Midnight Hammer? Now that we can look back at it, what parts were successful or what parts were a mistake? Was the whole operation a mistake that accelerates the Iran nuclear program or the incentives for it, or is there some components that actually is a disincentive for Iran to develop the program? And then maybe you can comment on the same. It'd be nice
Well,
just to get comments on
I think we really don't know, right? There's some initial battle assessments and arguments and all that about just how much was destroyed and what, and we don't know exactly what their reaction is going to be. There were reports of them saying, "Hey, we're already starting up a new facility somewhere else." There were reports where they said, "Hey, a lot of our centrifuges survived, and we're going to start spinning them up right now," and this kind of thing. The potential's there. I don't know what the Ayatollah is going to do, and I think this goes to the larger argument about the apocalyptic threat of the Ayatollah, which Mark has not made, but which Israel hawks often do. That these guys just can't wait to get into a war and all this. In fact, if you look at Iran,
well, they're in a war, but what the argument I make is they're not going to use a nuclear weapon.
You interrupt me every time. I try to say anything.
Scott, it's just you're mischaracterizing what I'm saying. I need to clarify when you mischaracterize.
He's not interrupting every time, but sometimes interrupting. Yes. So try not to interrupt as much. Yeah. Go ahead, Scott. Don't take it personally. Come on. Let's go.
It seems like a deliberate attempt to obfuscate and prevent me from just being able to complete a point. He does it virtually every time.
No, it's not. As a listener, I'm enjoying this.
Well, look, on the face of it, they blew up a lot of stuff and they made them very angry. So are they going to now give in, or they're now going to double down, or they're now going to hold still? We don't really know. As I was trying to explain, from the Ayatollah's position that he's in, what are you going to do with a problem like the United States of America? Right? They can chant great Satan, this and that all they want. They had no ability to really threaten this country in any way. And they know that America absolutely does have the ability to, in fact, even without nuclear weapons, essentially wipe their civilization off the face of the earth just with B-52s if we wanted to carpet bomb their major cities. And they know, the Ayatollah knows. He's in a very difficult position. And look at what he did. When they assassinated Soleimani, he sent essentially a symbolic strike at an empty corner of an American base in Iraq. It did cause some concussions and head trauma, but he deliberately did that to not cause casualties. And then Trump let him have the last word. And then also when they shot down the drone, which I think Trump was suspicious that the Pentagon had flown that into Iranian airspace, and they demanded strikes, and Trump said, no, it's just a drone. How many Iranians will die at the base you want me to hit? No, I don't want to kill them. I don't want to do it. And again, he let the Ayatollah get the last word. Same thing happened again with yesterday's strikes. Iran hit our Central Command headquarters, the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, and also an American base, I think, in Baghdad, and I'm not sure about in Iraqi Kurdistan.
Zero casualties so far?
Zero casualties so far. So what is going on there, essentially, is he's got to do something. He's doing like these symbolic strikes, essentially, to say, like, hey, you can't do that to me. But then he's also telegraphing that, hey, like, I can't do anything about you, and I don't really want to fight. And so in a way, he's like kind of backing down. And then what did Donald Trump say? Donald Trump, again, let him have the last word. And in fact, like bragged and mocked and said, hey, thanks, Ayatollah, for giving us a warning that you were about to shoot missiles at our base so we could be ready to shoot them all down and this kind of thing. And he said, now is the time for peace. In other words, Trump, again, letting the Ayatollah get the last word. Why? Because the Ayatollah, he might be a horrible leader if you live in Iran, but he is not perfectly, but essentially cautious in foreign policy. Because what's he going to do? He's going to decimate our naval base at Bahrain. He's going to slaughter all our troops in Kuwait. And then what's Trump going to do? And so the Ayatollah knows. So it's the same people who, and I don't include him in this, but you hear a lot of the hawkish talk about just how easy this has been. These same people talking about what an absolutely irrational, religiously motivated and therefore, crazy and irrational group of people the mullahs are, and why they can only be dealt with force. When in fact, what they're showing is essential conservatism, trying to hold on to what they got, making a latent deterrent because they know if they break out toward a bomb, that'll get them bombed. So they were hoping having a latent deterrent would be enough to just keep them at the status quo. That's why it's so disingenuous. Just again with Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, saying, forget the intelligence, because 60%, hey, It's 99% of the way there. Close enough for us. So it doesn't matter if the Ayatollahs decided to make her nuke or not. They're just too close to one as it is, which is really silly because they're not much closer than they've been for 20 years. Since the W. Bush administration, they proved they've mastered the fuel cycle.
That is one of the fundamental disagreements in the room, that you're saying they really don't have interest to develop a nuclear weapon, and they're not quite.
Well, not exactly.
Not
I said
more
was
towards that direction than Mark is saying.
more toward, but they're saying, look at us. We're a threshold state. Don't push your luck and force us to make the bad decision. Now that's an implication. They have not said that outright, but clearly the implication is that if we force them, then they will go ahead and make a nuclear weapon.
What I mean is, if left on their own devices, they would not develop. That's the case you're making.
Well, not just on their own devices, but if we were to try to negotiate with them in good faith and try to have normal relations with them, that would disincentivize a nuclear weapon even further.
Okay, can you comment on the mission, on the operation in
Sure.
general?
A couple things I think were interesting what Scott said, and I agree with certainly with some of it. I mean, the first thing is I do believe President Trump has negotiated in good faith. I mean, he sent Steve Witkoff, his chief negotiator, for 5 rounds of negotiations since he came in office. The second is, I mean, we can keep going around in circles, but the fact of the matter is I do believe that Iran and Iran-backed terrorist organizations have, since 1979, killed and tried to kill and maim Americans and taken them hostage. I think it's important for me, again, to put that on the record. But where I agree with Scott is, and it's interesting, and I don't know if Khamenei has changed. In his, he's 86 years old. He's been in power since 1989. And there's a little bit of history that I think is really interesting, Lex. It was 1988, and Iran and Iraq had fought this brutal 8-year war, 1 million people dead. And the United States accidentally shot down a Iranian passenger airline. The United States offered to pay compensation and apologized. And the Iranians didn't believe it. They didn't believe we could accidentally do that. They thought we were going to be intervening militarily on behalf of Saddam. So Khamenei, who's not the supreme leader at the time, he was the Iranian president, he and Rafsanjani, they go to Khomeini and they say, Mr. Ayatollah, we got to sue for peace with the Iraqis because the Americans are intervening and we cannot fight the Americans. We fought this brutal war. We'll continue with Saddam. We cannot fight the United States of America. And I think Scott's right. Like that perception that there's no way they can fight the United States of America because that's regime ending, potentially. Even if we don't intend to, that could actually happen. And there's a famous line where Khomeini says, all right, I agree. I will drink the poison chalice. I'll drink the poison chalice, and I will agree to a ceasefire on pretty tough terms for Iran. It's interesting now, 36 years later, or 37 years later, Khamenei is now going to decide to drink the poison chalice. Does he agree to a negotiated deal with the United States? Does he agree to a deal that President Trump, and I mean, Scott criticizes me for it, but that's President Trump's position, is no enrichment, full dismantlement. By the way, that's backed up by 52 of 53 Republican senators and 177 House GOP members, and backed by everybody in his administration, including J.D. Vance, who's been emphatic about that. Does he agree to that deal? Or does he decide, I'm not going to drink the poison chalice, and I'm going to take other options? Now, I agree with Scott. Like going after U.S. military bases, except in a symbolic way, suicidal. Closing the Straits of Hormuz, 40% of Chinese oil goes through there. The Chinese have been saying to the Iranians, don't you dare. By the way, 100% of Iranian oil goes from Iran and Karg Island through the Straits of Hormuz, so economically suicidal for the Iranians to do that. Terror attacks, absolutely. I mean, that has been their modus operandi for years. So I would be concerned about terrorist attacks against U.S. targets, against civilians, potentially sleeper cells in the United States. So he's used terror cells around the world. He's engaged in a decades-long assassination campaign, including on American soil, by the way, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, including most recently where he went after an Iranian American 3 times to try to assassinate her in New York, a woman named Masih Alinejad. And so he's got to be calculating, like, what is my play? So if I don't do a deal, how can I actually squeeze the Americans? And Scott's right. Like, he must be thinking to himself, you know what? I was literally on the 99-yard line with an entire nuclear weapons capability. I should have crossed the goal line. If I had had a warhead, a nuclear warhead, or multiple nuclear warheads, as they had been trying to build since the Ahmad Plan in early 2000s, there's no way Israel and the United States would have hit me militarily if I had nuclear weapons. Then I would have had the ultimate deterrence to prevent that. And then I would be like Kim Jong-un with nuclear weapons. I would then build ICBMs, and then I'd have the ultimate deterrent to stop that. So he's got to be thinking maybe now, and I can guarantee you, the Revolutionary Guards.
Do you think that might have anything to do with the fact that America attacked Iraq and Libya when they did not have weapons of mass destruction programs?
Can I tell you, the Libya example, I think, Scott, is the most interesting one for me, right? Because in the Libya example, it was a big mistake. By the way, Ukraine is another good example of this. We went to the Libyans and we said, you must fully dismantle your program. And Gaddafi said, reluctantly, under huge American pressure, okay, I'll do it. And the Brits and the Americans went in there and literally hauled out his entire nuclear.
It wasn't really a program. It was just a bunch of AQCons junk sitting in crates in a warehouse. They did not have the capability to make a nuclear program at all in Libya. They didn't have the engineers, the scientists, or anyone. So Gaddafi had bought that junk just to trade it away. Just to be clear, there never was a nuclear weapons program or a nuclear program of any kind in Libya, unlike what you just heard.
But that wasn't my point. Okay, my point is he had a nuclear program.
Facts are important.
We can debate about, again, how we've been debating about whether, again, it's always Gaddafi and Khamenei and all these people. They don't really want nuclear weapons. We just misunderstand them. But that's not the point. The point is we did a deal with Gaddafi. We pulled out his nuclear program. And then, I don't know how many years later, but it wasn't too many years later, 7 years later, thank you, Scott, we actually took Gaddafi out. And he didn't have a nuclear program, so we took him out in the Libya operation. Now, Ukraine is another great example. The Ukrainians, after the fall of the Soviet Union, you know this, they had the Soviet nuclear arsenal or good parts of it on their soil. So we went to them and we said, all right, well, here's a deal for you. Give up the nuclear arsenal, right, off your territory, and we and the Russians and the French guarantee your territorial integrity and your sovereignty as a country. So the Ukrainians said, fair deal to me, gave up all the nuclear weapons, and then Putin has now invaded Ukraine twice.
That's not what the Bucharest Declaration says, that we promised their security. We promised to respect it, and the Russians promised too, and both sides broke that promise. But there is nothing like a guarantee that America would protect Ukraine's sovereignty.
No.
They gave up those nukes, and they had no ability to use those nukes anyway because they were Soviet nukes with Soviet codes. They belonged to the Soviet military, and the Ukrainians would have had no ability to use them or to deliver them. They were married to missiles that were made to fly around the world, not to Russia next door.
But Scott, my point is, and I think this you'll agree with this, my point is, if you're Khamenei and you've seen those two examples of Libya, you gave up your nuclear program, Gaddafi gets taken down. You're Ukraine, you gave up your nuclear weapons, and the Russians invaded twice. If you're Khamenei thinking to yourself, the only thing that matters more to me than my nuclear weapons program is my regime's survival. And in 12 days of war, the Israelis specifically, because we hit Fordo and Isfahan and Natanz, we, the United States, hit those sites. We, the United States, hit those sites.
The gleeful nature, Scott, like, stop. Take that out. There's no place here in this room with me, the un-American bullshit. Don't do that. The implication here, man, is that me, am un-American. I've been attacked just like the Russian hoax for being a Putin shill. I'm an American.
Well, when you talk about Ukraine's war with Russia, do you say we or do you say they?
I said we, the United States. We actually.
Well, you added the United States, but you had just described Israel strikes.
Israel didn't strike Fordo, Scott.
He talked about the U.S. attack. You're speaking to this other people that you've heard that somehow they do say we, and they talk about, I would say, ridiculously, as if I've even heard some people basically put Israel above U.S. and they're American citizens. Yeah, that's fucking ridiculous. But none of those people are in this room. There are demons under the bed. I'm sure those people exist. There's ridiculous people on the internet. There's ridiculous people in Congress. We can criticize them, make fun of them, say they're fucking
the Foundation
crazy.
for Defense of Democracies has been the vanguard of the war party in this country for 25 years.
Well, that's a different criticism, but I was.
It's an important one.
Yes, yeah, but no, you just switched. Well, no. There's no un-American. You just switch from the un-American discussion to criticizing policies that particular institute. Fine, criticize the policies.
Yeah,
do
but
that.
what is
Don't
the
do the un-American bullshit.
Lex, the
Not here.
neoconservative movement is the vanguard of the Israel lobby. That's who they are. That's what neoconservatism is
Lex,
about.
I'm not a neocon.
That's who the war
I'm not a
party is.
neoconservative, so I don't know
Well,
who he's talking
but
about, but I'm not a neoconservative.
Let's not mix stuff up.
There is a massive Israel lobby in America, in Washington, that is inseparable
Here we
from
go
the
again.
American war party.
Yeah. I've talked to John Mearsheimer. I respect him deeply. He's one of the most brilliant people speaking on that
Agree.
topic. Great.
Okay.
Let's just talk about today and the nuclear proliferation.
Yes.
You guys have been brilliant on this. I'm learning a lot. Let's continue.
Yeah. So let's go back to where Khamenei may be. I mean, in a bunker, 86 years old, thinking he's going to drink the poison chalice and agree to a deal with Donald Trump and Oman, or is he going to do all of the things that Scott and I are concerned about? And one of those, and Scott has pointed this out, rightly so, is he may decide now to break out for the nuke or creep out for the nuke. He may decide not to do it now. He may decide to do it in 3.5 years when President Trump is gone. Right? And I think that the important thing is he's seen the United States, took out Fordo and Natanz and Isfahan in one operation with B-2 bombers and 12 30,000-pound massive orange penetrators and Tomahawk missiles. So if he didn't think that the United States had serious military power before, he now knows we do.
So to you, that operation was geopolitically a success. It sends a message of strength that if you try to build, you're going to be punished for it.
So I've said online in the past 12 days and even before that, curb your enthusiasm. Curb your enthusiasm. To all the people
related to which topic?
Yeah, just this sort of idea that this has been like this unbelievable success and everything's great and everything's going to be amazing and we've stopped the nuclear weapons program and this has been a resounding success. I've just said kind of curb your enthusiasm. Khamenei remains very dangerous. The regime remains very dangerous. A wounded animal is the most dangerous animal in the animal kingdom. He retains key capabilities to build weapons.
You demanded unconditional surrender on Twitter again last night, right? After Trump said there's a ceasefire.
What does unconditional surrender mean?
It means no
exactly?
enrichment, full dismantlement. Okay. Yes, exactly right. It's exactly what President Trump... Well, I
Not
can't...
regime change. Unconditional surrender in World War II meant the end of the Nazi regime and the imperialist Japanese regime entirely, right?
But President Trump made it very clear. President Trump made it very clear because he made it clear, I don't support regime change.
Well, except for that one post.
A few hours earlier, right?
I'll explain that one because I thought it was really.
Can you analyze it like a Shakespeare? What is that?
Yeah.